Hey y'all, it's your girl Sonja, and welcome back to She Say Sports. Today I have with me award-winning journalist, TV reporter, and radio host, Kelsey Nicole Nelson. Hi Kelsey, how are you today?
I'm fantastic. Thanks so much for having me, Sonja. A pleasure to come on your show, especially when I get to join someone that also has Mississippi roots. So it feels good to be home.
Wait a minute, you're from Mississippi originally?
My parents are from Jackson, Mississippi, and I used to spend my summers down there. So I am a Southern Belle that was born in the DMV, but Mississippi is very near and dear to my heart. So it's like DMV has half my heart and Mississippi has the other half.
This is so cool. That's awesome. Well, yeah. So your grandparents, were they Nelsons?
So my grandparents were actually the Byrd family, B-Y-R-D. So my family in Mississippi, if you know the Byrd family, that is my mom's side of the family. My grandmother unfortunately recently passed last year, but a lot of my uncles still live down there. So Mississippi, my mom actually will be going back down there soon. I will hopefully get back down there, of course, after COVID ends, so it's more safe to travel. But my parents are my parents are high school sweethearts, Sonja, Callaway High School. And then for the show I do with Washington, I work with Fred Smoot. So Mississippi's pretty much all around me.
Absolutely. I was going to mention that in the show. So that is so cool. I know some birds. We'll get into that. But
you probably know my family. They're big down there in Mississippi, Sonja.
Oh, wow. That is so cool. That is great. Well, I mean, you already just tell the listeners a little bit else about yourself.
Yeah, of course.
We now know you have Jackson, Mississippi roots. That's awesome.
I do. So I'm rooting. My dad went to Grambling, though, so I'll tell you, I can't root for Jackson State, but all of my aunts did go to Jackson State. So, again, Mississippi is literally half of my life story, but I'm Kelsey Nicole Nelson. I am born and bred in the DMV area, so I have to say this sometimes because some people don't realize what DMV means. D.C., Maryland, and Virginia. I am a graduate of the University of Maryland for undergrad, where I got my degree in broadcast journalism, and then I went on to Georgetown University for grad school and got my degree in sports industry management. And I'm actually back at Georgetown now as a part-time adjunct faculty staff where I'm a capstone advisor. I'm also teaching intro to radio and podcasting at Doral College virtually here from D.C., and then everyone in D.C. knows me because I have my own show listed in with KNN. It's a sports talk podcast and radio on Fox Sports Radio here in D.C. And I'm also a digital and broadcast host for the Washington football team. So I host 2 of their digital shows and 1 of their television shows on NBC Sports Washington. And luckily for basically what I do in the D.C. area is I cover all of our pro teams here. So Mystics, Wizards, Washington football team, and also our major college teams. So I also cover Georgetown in Maryland. I cover Georgetown for the Big East Digital Network. I cover their girls basketball program as well as Georgetown football. So basically, I am just a sports person in the D.C. area, but I also get to travel since I freelance. I do a little bit of everything. Sonja, it's been an honor and pleasure to kind of keep living out my dream each and every day.
That's a blessing to be able to live out your dream. That is awesome. And so, excuse me, you mentioned. Well, you kind of talked about everything that I was going to mention. You also host Sports Smarts podcast series for the National Sports Media Association.
Yep.
I just want to know, how did your journey in the sports industry start?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I will tell you, and you know this because you're in Mississippi, but growing up with Southern roots, like I grew up with sports. Pretty much sports and church, right? It's the 2 things that you're most passionate about. So a love of the Lord and a love of sports. And for me, my dad went to Grambling. That's kind of self-explanatory. So I grew up in a world, right, of Bayou Classics and football. And I've always been a daddy's girl. I have a girl dad, and I always gravitated towards him and always gravitated towards sports. So growing up, I also played a bunch of sports. I was that tall girl before everybody else hit their growth spurts. So I played soccer, tennis, basketball, volleyball. I've always been competitive, of course, always loved winning. And for me, sports have always just been great because I love how they brought people together. And you just have a good time playing sports, right? For me, it's hard for me to see how people don't like sports. And then I grew up just watching my idols. I grew up My parents, when we got we were given a ticket. My family was given tickets to our first professional sporting event. And I remember watching the Washington Mystics here in the D.C. area and the Wizards era. This is your Gilbert Arenas Agent Zero era, Caron Butler era, and your Mystics with Elena Beard and Coco Miller. Like, I can keep going back, but I just always loved being in the sporting space. So I knew growing up that I just wanted to have my career be around sports because I couldn't imagine being without them. So I had to give all my props to sports to my dad. And then luckily I was able to kind of continue my sports career in college, of course, going to a school like Maryland, working with the athletic department and getting to cover the University of Maryland's football programs. And then for me, I was at Maryland at a unique time because, Sonja, I was there when Maryland switched over from the ACC to the Big Ten. So kind of being a part of that change was great. And then, of course, going to a school like Georgetown, again, another school that's kind of self-explanatory. When you grow up in the D.C. area, Hoya paranoia is a real thing. Growing up going to Georgetown games and McDonough Arena and just, all the Georgetown greats, the Maryland greats. So being around just a great sporting scene in D.C., I was lucky and privileged to grow up in that, and I just knew I never wanted to leave it. And so it's great for me to be able to work in my hometown.
That is awesome. And we kind of have the same story. I was a daddy's girl, started watching sports with my father at 5, and I was watching commercial one day and saw Jane Kennedy.
Yes.
Not that I knew who she was because of Tab, and I think you may be too a little young for that, but Tab commercials, and, she was doing shows. However, she was the first female Black journalist.
Yes, a pioneer.
So, and I told my dad I want to do that. And he was like, you can do it. And I was 8 years old when that happened, actually. And so I was a little older then. But it never left me. Now, I did not play sports. Does kickball count?
Kickball counts. And look, I will tell you, I'm a boys and girls club kickball champion. So we're going to count kickball. I love kickball.
Well, I actually started the kickball league here in Jackson in 2012 with adults.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So my team we won back-to-back championships. It was great, but that was basically all I ever did. Now, like you, very tall, and I had the height, but I never played because I felt like I was not adequate enough to play. Like I just wasn't good enough. And so my sister was 5'5", but she was great at basketball, and I always got chose last. So, they weren't mean to me, but it's just that stuck with me, and so I never tried to play basketball or anything. But they're similar stories, so I can understand.
Yeah. I love our
and
crossover and intersection, and I'll just tell you, you mentioned Jane Kennedy, she's from Washington, D.C., so though she preceded my time, I grew up knowing about Jane Kennedy early on, and for me, it's just been honestly an honor and privilege to even have people in the D.C. area, like when they talk to me, like mention her name. I'm like, that is a pioneer, in sports, and it's so humbling, and it's what pushes me and just pulls me every day, and she's actually one. Sonja, I'm hoping to one day meet and interview because I think she's just tremendous and amazing. So Jane Kennedy, if you're listening to the show, you got 2 future interviews with 2 Black women who just want to share your trailblazing story.
and because of you, we're doing this because of you. So
exactly.
That would be awesome. I that is a dream of mine. It really is. So, but I need to know, with all of these different podcasts, and how do you even have time, Kelsey?
How? That is something I am still asking myself. It's so funny, Sonja, because I just became the membership chair for the Washington Association of Black Journalists, and my friend's like, Kelsey, this is great, but thank you. My friend's like, Kelsey, this is great, and you're doing so many things, but like, when do you have time? And I will tell you, time management is something I had to learn, but I truly believe if you want to do something, you make time for it. And so, again, it's just balancing and also just committing 100% to everything. I also don't take on anything if I can't give myself 100% because I'm big into quality over quantity, right? I want quality work than just having titles. And that's something I tell my mentees all the time. It's better to have quality with all the jobs that you're doing than quantity because no one wants somebody that's giving a half effort, right? I mean, we work in a business that's very demanding, and you always have to be on top of your game, and it is competitive. So for me, it's just knowing, again, just how to kind of space things out. And luckily for us, of course, the sports seasons are kind of shifting. So luckily, like football off season, it's been a little bit slower with my work with the Washington football team. But I'm actually preparing for the draft and going to Cleveland, right? So things will pick back up towards the end of April. So again, it's just trying to find any block of space. But I will say something I instituted during COVID is just giving myself an hour each day for me, where I have time to kind of unwind and decompress. I will say your mental health is very important, and making sure you have time for you.
And that's true. I was going to ask you, how are you dealing with COVID, but that's true. I think that second week, I didn't realize it until later, but I was kind of getting a little depressed because I live alone. And
me too. So I feel you. Yeah.
Thank God for D Nice and the other DJs that started
Versus.
Yeah, well, not verses, but when they
his
started
battles
playing
that
music.
he was doing. Yes,
No,
D-Nice was like the originator.
Yeah,
because he had us on his IG Live.
Yeah, I actually was one of the 300 that he only had like 200 or 300 on his first
live. And you were there.
I happened to scroll, and I was like, so that saved me. When that song last night, a DJ saved my life, he did.
Wow.
And D-Nice saved
That's powerful. That's powerful because
Yeah,
I think you're right. Like, we were so used to being around people, and then we were forced into being alone. And I think people forget, especially like you said, when you do live alone. And look, I have a small apartment right outside of the city. So it was hard to kind of adjust. And if you can't tell, I'm very extroverted, right? So I'm getting placed into, getting placed into, a box, and then having to switch over to virtual where you're still communicating, but it's not the same as in person. You're right. And it's something that we all had to get used to. And I think something we're still getting used to. But this is why I hope sooner than later, I'm hoping everybody gets vaccinated so we can kind of start to get back to some type of normalcy, because I think we all miss that.
Absolutely. I do. I miss hugging. I did hug for the first time a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, that's so nice.
And
I'm like,
it's been rough.
So nice.
I was like, oh my God. So I'm just happy about that. But Kelsey, you mentioned earlier that you're a sideline reporter for the Big East Digital Network, where you cover Georgetown women's basketball.
Yes.
Did the sideline reporting come as a result of you hosting the different podcasts, or is it something like the chicken before the egg situation?
That is such a great question. And yes, I think the sideline really came because I had a chance to build my brand. And I'd say my podcasting helped. But also, I always tell people how I first started. I started covering high school sports, and I started at community access television. And this is why I tell people, people see kind of the glitz and glam, but always know somebody's story, right, and not just the glory. Because once you know their story, you'll see how they kind of got to where they developed. And for me, the sideline reporting came because I was able to hone my skills on community access public television, right? I was covering Wizards games. I was covering, the local high schools, covering Maryland. And, of course, when you do that on community access television, you kind of get more room for growth and to develop, because you don't have as many eyes on you. You still have eyes on you, but not as many eyes. And luckily, I had great mentors there, like Andrew Dyer, who is a legend in this area. And the show I started on, the Roundball Report, if people know Christy Winter-Scott, who does a lot with the Big Ten Network, she started there. Stephanie Reddy also started there. So, coming behind the tutelage of women like that, was just truly amazing. And so that's kind of where I got better at my skills. And then, I started sideline reporting for Georgetown. And luckily, since I had went to Georgetown, a lot of them had already known me at the school, because actually in college, Sonja, I had interned in the athletic department. And so they kind of saw my growth. Okay. They saw my brand building. And this is when it comes back to networking and keeping in contact with your contacts, because you never know when you might run into them again.
That's true. And, yeah, you're absolutely, and try not to burn bridges. So you're absolutely right.
Exactly.
That's awesome. So, Kelsey, like you mentioned earlier, you work with Mississippi's own, Fred Smoot.
Yes.
Fred and I attended the same high school, not at the same time. I'm a little older. And he also played college football at Mississippi State in Clarksville. We're very proud of him here in Jacktown, and he's like a homeschool legend.
Yes.
So how has it been working with Fred, and how has he shared any of his triumphs of his high school days at Provine or at State?
Yeah, so I'll tell you, when I first started working with Fred, I had to tell him my parents went to Callaway, because the rivalry that happens. So me and Fred started off as arch enemies, but of course, no, we grew to like each other. No, Fred is easy to work with and talk with, and I had worked with Fred previously before actually going to Washington. And Fred, if anybody knows Fred is the best person to work with. He has such a fun personality, very welcoming, very funny. If anything, it's hard for me to sometimes keep a serious face, because Fred is always cracking jokes, but he's just been great. And I think, we share similar stories. We're able to talk about Mississippi. Fred comes from humble beginnings, and even before, if you think about the community college track, right, that no one talks about, just knowing his story and how he made it from the NFL, and it's always representing Mississippi and always uplifting it. I think it's so great to hear those stories. And I think for us, both of us, we're very big on shining a positive light on Mississippi, because I think, quite frankly, it's people on the East Coast and just people outside of Mississippi, they hear the negative stories, Sonja. Absolutely. And no, we shine light on the positive stories and the greatness that comes out of the state. And I just was able to connect with someone that also knows Fred on my show, Eric Molds, another guy from Mississippi, who, of course, had playing time in the National Football League with
Right.
the Buffalo Bills, another Mississippi State guy, right? So
Yeah.
it's just great to be able to share and connect with those stories. And I'll tell you, I'm a bit biased because anytime I see somebody from Mississippi, I'm like, oh, we're connecting, and I have to work with you some way, somehow, because it's just positive vibes. And I think that's that
so
Southern
cool.
spirit and that Southern, just genuineness that comes. And so, yeah, me and Fred, it's always a fun time working with him. And, of course, since he played for Washington, we're able to kind of touch on DMV culture, Washington culture, and, of course, always bring in Mississippi and Southern culture into our shows.
That is awesome. I have to get him on the show. Please tell him I will be.
Yes, I will connect him with you because that would be great. And believe me, once Fred knows the Mississippi Connect, he's also a big supporter, I will tell you, just women in sports and supporting them. He's just an awesome ally, I think, as well, just to, uplift and amplify the voices of females and women.
That's awesome. That's good to hear. So, Kelsey, last month you received an honor being named one of the phenomenal women of faith during Women's History Month in D.C. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. That means so much to me, Sonja. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
You're so welcome. Could you explain to our listeners more about this recognition and what it means to you?
Yeah, so this recognition, was incredible, and it was something I wasn't expecting. And the other 39 women I was honored with, coming from all walks of life, but very distinguished women in that group. And I was probably one of the youngest or the youngest amongst that group.
Wow.
So it was just a humbling experience for me. And I always tell people, I walk by faith, not by sight. I give everything to my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. And so to be named a woman of faith and someone that stays true to her faith, never shies away from it. And, I am where I am thanks to the Almighty above. It meant a lot. And to be honored for that, it's a dream come true, honestly. I'm just thankful for that honor and recognition. And a big thanks to all the people that put it apart. It was so many great organizations, but, the D.C. Council and the Democrats of D.C. and the Women Democrats of D.C. It was so many great organizations that pulled that together. So, God, it's just an honor I will be forever thankful for, and just glad, to be recognized for that. But I always tell people, you got to keep true to who you are, and I'm a woman of faith, and I will never shy away from that.
And I love that. I'm glad to hear that from you because it's a lot of women that, since I've been doing this show, that are women of faith that have a true relationship with the Father, and they're true believers. And it's good to see that in sports. You don't, some people may not think there's a place for it, but it's always a place for it. And I'm glad to see a lot of women in sports, talking about their faith. And that's a good thing. That is an awesome thing. Well deserved.
Thank you so much, Sonja. I appreciate you talking about that. And big congrats as well to everybody else on that honor. Like, again, it was just, I'm so thankful for it. Wasn't expecting it, but I cherish it near and dear to my heart, with my other awards and recognition. Because at the end of the day, I'm just a girl from a small town that's trying to live out her dreams, Sonja. So I take nothing for granted.
Absolutely. And the sky's the limit. You are making those dreams come true. That's
Thank
sure.
you so much. I appreciate that so much. And just glad to be able to connect with great people like you. This is honestly why I love, the job that I get to do, because I get to meet new people every day or have great connections, connect me with great people. So shout out to Rod for connecting us. And this is what it's all about.
I know Rod Walker.
Yes.
We're talking about you, sir. He's been on my show several times. Last year when COVID first happened, a month after, they moved up Michael Jordan's documentary, The Last Dance.
Ah, yes.
So we broke it down. We exegeted every week for 8 weeks. And when I say it was amazing and was sad when it was over with. I'm a huge Michael Jordan fan since I was 12. So he was in
me and you both.
Oh,
and believe me, when he was playing in D.C., always had to be at the games.
I know
it was the later part of his career, but still we appreciated having MJ in a Wizards uniform.
Yeah, even though it was later, he's still Michael Jordan. I mean,
exactly.
People are still saying the Michael Jordan of. I mean, this man stopped playing ball 21 years ago. So
his impact is incredible.
Absolutely. So, but Rod has been on the show several times. He's been on here twice this year, and so I saw him last 2 weeks ago.
Nice.
So
that's
I
wonderful.
enjoy, such a great friend, and I love reading his articles. He is a sports head for sure. So I'm grateful for the connection. So,
yes.
so Kelsey, as we mentioned earlier, you're a sideline reporter for the Lady Warriors of Georgetown, and I'm sure you have lots of respect for what they do. But as you know, during last month's March Madness, a video went viral after Oregon Duck Sedona Price TikToked a video of the women's weight room versus the men's weight room. The women's weight room had a handful of dumbbells, while the men's weight room was full of equipment. It doesn't stop there. We then see a video showing what the ladies were given to eat, which looked like like a TV dinner of mystery meat covered in gravy, mixed veggies, and mashed potatoes. We then see a video of the men's food, and they had a full buffet. Last but not least, the men had more expensive COVID tests versus the women having tests that were not necessarily 100% accurate. I believe they had the rapid test.
Right.
So my question to you is, why do you think the disparities are still happening in the NCAA in 2021?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I'll tell you, it was so disheartening because, we're in a year where we're trying to amplify and uplift the voices of women, and what a way to set women back and really make women feel like a stay in your place thing, or you're not worthy, or you're not worthy. And that's the worst way to make women feel. When at this point, women need all the allies we can get. So not just women allies either, but we need people outside of our networks to also help us and join us in our call. And I would say it's still happening, unfortunately, because I think they feel like attention wasn't put on it. And I will tell you, I think people think they can get away with things, right, if no one's going to call it out, right? It's kind of like most people would do something maybe bad if they knew there was if they knew there was no type of punishment for it, right? And so I think for a long time, this has been happening. This is not new. I mean, go to most D1 schools and compare the women's practice facilities to the men's practice facilities, right? And compare even the type of gear that they get, right? It's usually going to be unequal and different. And it's so unfortunate because I think with Title IX and the progress that we've made with women in sports that it would be different. But I think this is when social media can be so good because you can quickly get messages out. So, you talked about that video from Sedona, and it had almost 11 million views on TikTok, people.
Crazy.
I mean, almost 200,000 retweets. And it happened so quickly because it spread like wildfire because people couldn't believe what they were seeing. And I think for the NCAA to not even think twice, one rack of weights, I have more rack of weights in my apartment that has, 136 units. Like, come on. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, I think it's crazy, but it just shows you kind of the old mindset in some people's minds, giving men more and women less. And if you think about it, women get paid less on the dollar, right, already, and I think society kind of has us, unfortunately, as second-class citizens. And again, this was such a horrible, horrible thing. When you think about it, a lot of these people that made this decision, they even have daughters. They have wives. And for some reason, they still thought this was okay. So I think it just shows kind of the old mindset that's in the head of many. And it shows we still have to fight for equality. Again, we've made progress, but there's still a long way to go. And I'm glad the social media attention was brought to it. And then the NCAA had to release a statement and, of course, apologize for it. And I think that's kind of the energy that we need to keep. You have to keep pressure on these organizations to say, you know what, that might have been how it's in the past and it was wrong, but we're going to try to make it right in the future. And so I love seeing that Dix was able to step up, right, and get equipment down there, even though they shouldn't have had to do it because it should have been right, in the first place. And you see Orange Theory stepping up. But I think the NCAA, I think it was really something they didn't think about because it had always been that way. But this year, the attention got brought onto it. And I think the energy of movements that we're seeing on social media. Remember, more people are home now. More people are watching things now. And so more attention is on things. So you can't get away with things. But I also think there's a growing woman empowerment movement happening, Sonja, in America. I think this is why we're seeing the voices of women even be amplified more. Look at someone like Renee Montgomery and the impact that she's had as a woman that was playing in the WNBA and is now on the ownership level. Here in Washington, D.C., Natasha Cloud of the Washington Mystics has been one of the roaring voices fighting for social equality, and fighting against racial injustice, sitting out last season at the WNBA. So I think it's the NCAA kind of not being with the times and not realizing the moment that we're in. But I will say I'm so happy the student athletes called it out and brought it to our attention so we could be their allies and fight for them and fight that good fight that should always be fought until women are one day having an equal seat at the table.
Absolutely. And, do you feel women in media are still dealing with some inequality as well?
Oh, for sure. For
Absolutely.
sure.
I
I mean, there's not enough women, in a lot of places. And I think even the positions you see women in, a lot of times we will be, generalized. And I do sideline reporting, but, it's kind of like the female role. Put us in the analyst roles. We don't want to only moderate debates. We want to be in the debate shows, right? We want to get paid the same amount on the dollar for our work. And so it's making sure that women are put in places where they can grow. We're still having the first women call games. We're still having the first of referees in games. Basically we have a long way to go because I want first to become many, and I want to make sure many does not become last. I think that's the fight that we're constantly fighting as females in sports.
That's true. And even going back to the women's basketball, they ball harder than the men sometimes.
Oh,
and
yeah.
The games are more interesting than the men's games sometimes. And I understand that, the men bring more revenue more than the women. But, things have to change. And I'm glad Sedona did what she did, put them on blast. Even though they didn't apologize immediately, they tried to make an excuse for it, saying it was not enough space, but it was plenty of space. However, they did apologize. And I hope, they make better decisions in the future. So
exactly, it's a learning period. I think we called them out, and they know that what they did was wrong. But my biggest thing is I judge people with what you do in a time of adversity, right? So you made a mistake, but actions will always speak louder than words. And how will you make this right? And I thought I don't want it to just be a moment in time or something that's trendy. We have to keep on the NCAA because these issues are not going to go away overnight. That's why we saw what we saw. But we want to make sure the problems that we saw in this year's tournament in 2021 do not happen in 2022. Right? So again, keeping that same energy and keeping pressure on the NCAA to make sure that we treat our female athletes the same as we treat our male athletes.
That's true. I totally agree. Kelsey, it has truly been a pleasure speaking with you today. I mean, I have enjoyed, this has been great. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Of course, my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me. I had so much fun.
I know. Please tell the listeners how they can follow you on social media.
Yes, of course. So everyone can keep up to date with me on my website at KelseyNicoleNelson.com. I'm on social media, Twitter and Instagram, The Real K Nelson. You can find me on Facebook, Kelsey Nicole Nelson. Also on LinkedIn if you want to connect with me there. Feel free to reach out to me by email, KelseyNicoleNelson.com. Sonja, it was such a pleasure again, and I hope everyone can check out my show, Listen In with KNN on Fox Sports Radio, which you can find on my social media channel, Kelsey Nicole Nelson on YouTube, and all of my social media pages. And, of course, follow my work with the Washington football team by following the Washington football team social channels. Thanks again so much, Sonja, for having me.
You're so welcome. And Listen In with KNN, does it come out every day? When does your podcast come out?
Of course, yep. So we do a live stream show every Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time and every Saturday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And then we also do a audio version of the show that drops every Wednesday. So this week we were a bit late, so it'll actually drop Thursday, but lots of special guests coming on. I have Josh Harvey Clemens joining me from the Washington football team this week. I also have Tim Shriver of Special Olympics International joining me this week. So again, just lots and lots and lots of great guests always joining me each week. I know we've had a similar guest on the show, and Terry Cummings. So I always try to bring some references. Yeah, so shout out to Terry Cummings, Pastor Terry Cummings for coming through.
It was I interviewed him. Actually, it was on inauguration day. He was busy, and we finally connected, and then you interviewed him a couple of weeks ago. Is that correct?
Right. Correct. Yep.
And
exactly.
I listened to the show, and I was like, when I saw it, I was like, oh my gosh. So, but I learned so much from your interview because you were talking. I was talking to him more about the DePaul Blue Demon, the Ray Meyer era.
Yes.
I was a huge DePaul Blue Demon fan as a child.
Yeah.
And so, I wanted to talk more about Ray Meyer and the team and everything, but I love that you talked about his upbringing, and he talked about where he was drinking at age 9 and had a what did he say, a gun or not?
And a gun, yes.
For protection at that age. And that is crazy because, I just couldn't imagine. But living in Chicago, that's one of my favorite cities. I was actually there a couple of weeks ago. but it's always been a rough place. I mean, it's full of culture and great food, and I mean, when I get there, I just smile, when I land, because I love Chicago.
It's a great place, and I have family there too. Talking about my family, if they look at that small world, and he grew up from Cabrini Green, and if people know about Cabrini Green, that's one of the roughest parts of Chicago. So I mean, he was literally growing up, in a violent area, and think about, people don't talk about enough the trauma that causes. So, he was fighting for protection. And, so young, he had to become a man, Sonja, right, to protect himself. Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was a great, I listened to the whole hour.
Oh,
I was like,
thank you.
I mean, and I smiled. I'm going to text, I texted him on his birthday.
Oh, nice,
and, and I'm going to text him. I'm like, guess who I just talked to? And, well, I know it's Wednesday, so he's at church, but I'll reach out to him tomorrow. But, it was such a pleasure meeting him. I hope to meet him in person. He has family from Jackson too.
Yeah, look, I did not get that on that show, but small world, world.
I think he said his parents are from here.
Look at
that. I told him, I said, you got to come down here. I'll fix you some food, and he was like, girl, don't make me get in my car and come, because Atlanta is 5-6 hours away from here.
Yes.
So, so small world.
I love that. We're going to have to all, have a reunion in there. And I will tell, because I'm like, I cannot wait to get back down there. I miss it. I would usually at least try to go back once a year again, because I have a lot of family there. I miss Martin's Fish House, get my chicken on a stick. So I'm going to have to get back down there.
Passed away. Mr. Martin passed away.
Oh, that's so sad. Oh, I did not know that.
But the place is still open. Yeah, just like maybe 2 or 3 months ago, it was so sad. I was like, oh, no. And
heartbreaking. So heartbreaking.
Why don't you try, that'll be a busy time for you. I was going to try to tell you to come during fall football. Dion is down here now.
Yeah, I know. See, I have to find a way down. I'm like, look at all that's happening. And I think you probably know Wisdom Martin as well here in this area, who is a Jackson State alum. So he lives in Clarksburg, he lives in Clarksburg now, where I actually grew up. And, of course, Wisdom, for people that don't know, Wisdom Martin from Jackson is a news anchor here for our morning news on Fox 5 DC. So there's Mississippi all around.
All over. Yeah, I interviewed him for the show last year, and we were in school together at Jackson State at the same time. Such an amazing guy. He is girl, we got too many connections.
I know. We're basically family, Sonja, is what I'm hearing.
Absolutely. That is so awesome. Yeah, Wisdom, he is a great guy. And what was so funny, and I'm going to let you go. When I interviewed him, when I called him, because my show is it was a year old in December, so I'm still a baby.
Congratulations, though. Look, the year is huge, so congratulations for making it.
So it was maybe like the 4th month, and when I got him on the phone, I was like, listen, he was like, hey, I was like, what am I doing? I'm interviewing a journalist. I can't do this. I can't. And he was like, you're fine. And, he helped me, get over it. And we laughed or whatever. But, things are getting better. So I'm excited about the changes that are happening with the show. And I'm going to give it to you after this, and we'll talk later.
Of course. I look forward to that.
Yeah, but guys, you can also follow me at She Say Sports on Facebook, She Say Sports 23 on Instagram. And guys, that's my show for today. So until next time, this is Sonja with She Say Sports, and I'll see you on the radio.